relationships are everything.
Mm-hmm.
I can't emphasize enough the value of long-term authentic connections and not just networks, right? Like I think when you start, you're trying to connect with a lot of people, or it's very transient and that's like, oh, I'm having this problem. I'm going to talk to this individual who's going to just help me fix this problem. And then we go on. But when I look back, those connections that I made, like that really turned into mentorship is really like to this day, there are folks who from the military side I connected with 30 years ago that I still interact with. And it's more than just casual conversation, but it's also being able to be vulnerable and explore things where it's like, I have this thought, here's how I'm trying to tackle it, and getting some really honest feedback from somebody who you've kind of fostered a long-term relationship with.
GovCon has a language of its own: acronyms, compliance, contracting, and when you're new, it can feel a little bit like alphabet soup. No one hands you a decoder ring, and that's why we're here. I'm your host, Amanda Ziadeh, and this is Rookies to Rockstars, where we get real about how people actually break in, level up, and lead in government contracting. Some careers in GovCon begin with a plan, others pure curiosity. John Pisano, Chief Information Officer at ASRC Federal, spent over 25 years at the intersection of government contracting, IT modernization, and integration, all while serving nearly 3 decades in the U.S. Army Reserve, most recently as a Brigade Command Sergeant Major. John started out as a music education major, then moved to IT, building a career on adaptability, purpose, and empathy, the same qualities that define his leadership today. Let's get into it. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Rookies to Rockstars, a short, sharp series where we ask bold, smart people one thing: what do you know now that you wish someone had told you at the start? Our guest today is John Pisano, CIO of ASRC Federal. Thank you for being here today, John.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. So, John, I understand that you've kind of built a career at the intersection of government contracting, IT modernization, integration, and so on. And we're curious about your journey to CIO at ASRC Federal. But along with your 25 years of experience in this space, I also understand that you served for nearly 3 decades in the U.S. Army Reserve and are currently a Brigade Command Sergeant Major. So a lot of your experience to discuss today, but I'd love to start, from the beginning. You went to college for IT, but where and how did your career start?
Yeah, so I fascination for technology, and I would say it actually started at a much younger age where I was just always curious about how things worked. And so my family would tell you that at a young age, taking apart the Commodore computer or the Amstrad, computer, just naturally led down that path of just that curiosity into technology. And so I actually went into college as a music education major, and then transitioned into the IT field, just given the passion I have in that space, then joining the Army as a musician to scratch the musical itch. So it kind of, the paths kind of inverted on me after I got going.
And you were in the reserve in college as well while you were studying? Okay. What was that dual, responsibility like for you?
Taught me a lot about time management, organization, also setting expectations both ways, right? Like when one thing had to take over the other or balancing it. Taught me those skills very, very early on.
Would you say that you have appreciated being able to foster both passions during your studies?
Yes, absolutely. When I come to a new role, I'm often asked like, hey, are you going to treat us like we're an Army unit or this and that? And what I typically tell folks is the Army gave me structure and discipline. And so a lot of, on the flip side, when not in uniform, is just structurally looking at things, organizing, understanding the problem set before tackling, the path that we're going to go down. And then being flexible when things don't go the way we thought it would.
May I ask what drew you to join the Army Reserve?
So many generations of family members serving in uniform, and not just, continuing the legacy, but always this feeling of something bigger than me, contributing to something bigger than me. And it made it really easy to just go down that path. And then, as you said, spend a little over 3 decades in uniform.
So tell us about the transition to industry after college. Where did you get your first job in IT?
So my first one was actually at a home builder in Cincinnati, Ohio. And I joined as a system administrator, which at the time was more like a really advanced help desk. And again, just that curiosity just continued to take on more and more responsibilities, working in a variety of different roles. And then it became, very networking centric infrastructure. How do I automate things that are repetitious that then kind of got me into development and so on? And it just kind of continued building from there. And in general, I would say just that the willingness to try something new or to find something to make me more efficient, I think it's just added more and more tools to my toolkit that made me more marketable, more impactful in the different roles that I had. And I was fortunate to work for structured companies as well as a number of different startups, which just gave me a very, very well-rounded experience.
And I'm assuming simultaneously, as you are progressing in industry, are you also taking on other responsibilities with the reserve?
I have been. And actually, the big milestone for me is last month, I actually finally retired from the Army Reserve.
Oh,
But
wow. Congrats.
yeah, like I said, started off as a musician,
Mhm.
came a point where I wanted to do something different. I taught for a while. I was like what we call an observer controller. That's kind of watching units do things and provide guidance and coaching on, hey, you could do these things differently. The latter part of my career, I went into the engineer world, started doing more in that space. And then, I culminated my career at the Army Reserve Innovation Command, as you noted, as one of the brigade command sergeant majors, where we were really looking at like, how do you take the challenges that the warfighter is having and connect that with solutions, whether industry-based or ideas that we've not yet advanced yet to something that's, ready for use, but something that we can iterate on.
Awesome. So was joining Booz Allen your entrance into working on the federal contracting side?
It was.
So did you, I'm assuming having, been in the federal space, you might have been a bit more familiar with the industry than perhaps someone who wasn't, but what drew you initially to, take on entering that industry?
Relationship, right? So a couple of colleagues that I had worked with at a couple of startups had kind of ventured their way there, and there was an opportunity that aligned very closely with my skills, and it entertained, this opportunity to me. And like you said, I was familiar with how the government operates, just being a uniformed, service member, but being able to take the technology and apply it to something bigger than me, like it kind of resonated for me. And in a company that size, lots of different opportunities to just be in different roles and take on different challenges.
Do you have a piece of advice? You're probably a bit more familiar with the industry, having had those relationships and, being with the Army Reserve, but any piece of advice or knowledge about the GovCon or IT industry that you wish you'd had at the beginning that you would offer to those, interested in a similar career path?
The biggest thing I could say, and I touched on it a couple of times, is like relationships are everything. I can't emphasize enough the value of long-term authentic connections and not just networks, right? Like I think when you start, you're trying to connect with a lot of people, or it's very transient, and that's like, oh, I'm having this problem. I'm going to talk to this individual who's going to just help me fix this problem, and then we go on. But when I look back, those connections that I made, like that really turned into mentorship, is really like to this day, there are folks who from the military side I connected with 30 years ago that I still interact with. And it's more than just casual conversation, but it's also being able to be vulnerable and explore things where it's like, I have this thought, here's how I'm trying to tackle it, and getting some really honest feedback from somebody who you've kind of fostered a long-term relationship with.
So we've talked a lot about your career here, but can you briefly take us through some of the highlights and which transitions or roles were especially pivotal and perhaps what you learned from them?
So I would say the most pivotal and highlighted ones were the ones that put me into a role that was different enough from what I was doing. Being a technologist, it's really easy, like, oh, this is a network person, or this is a developer, or just a general technologist. But being willing to step into areas where you're expanding yourself, you're challenging yourself while still contributing value back to whatever you're trying to do. So for me, in the more recent years, what I would say is like my time at Booz Allen, started as a technologist working very technical problems for different defense customers. And I was asked to take on, combination of different, what we call differentiated roles. And it was one of those things where it's like, my first one was like, hey, we're working to improve the quality of software development that we do. And so we're going to create this function that's going to go out and kind of, review things, look at them from a risk perspective and help guide teams, and then be available to help like do rescue missions, right? If they're struggling and they need help. And that was kind of that transition from a doer to a, hey, now I'm going to take the doing and the knowledge and apply it to a variety of things that, I'm going to help them. But along the way, I started to learn a lot more about the business. I started to learn like how they bid on jobs, how they structure jobs, how you balance the equities of getting the skill sets you need on those jobs while still being, competitive in the market. And then that grew into we acquired this company and we're assembling this team of folks who are going to help integrate it and kind of bring our businesses together, bring our capabilities together. And on the surface, it was like, okay, cool. Yeah. Technology. When I actually stepped into the role, it became like so much more about learning how the fundamentals of the business worked. And so for me, having grown up in a variety of roles, technical and non-technical, I picked up things all along the way, but really understanding like from end to end, this is how what the customer or client is asking us for all the way through to when we actually start, how we pull all these different levers. It was uncomfortable when I first started doing it because I was like, ooh, I don't know half of this, but the knowledge I gained just learning how the business worked not only helped me in the business, but long after, like even in my role today, that understanding I built, still applies today. And the lessons learned, the ways that you could go about pulling different levers to hit success, there's still things today that I use that had I not been willing to step into that, what was uncomfortable at the time, probably never would have learned. I would have still been a technologist who was just really good at technology.
How did you handle those uncomfortable moments, like moving past the uncertainties or perhaps like a bit of imposter syndrome, knowing that you have to kind of still learn and work through things to get there? How did you work through those moments in your career?
So two mindsets, right? A growth mindset and a resilience through purpose, right? So from a growth mindset perspective, seeing challenges as opportunities to learn rather than as threats. And then on the resiliency through purpose, just staying grounded in the why behind the work that I'm doing to help me when I'm navigating uncertainty. And so always when times are tough or it's feeling very uncomfortable, thinking about, this isn't a threat. This is a way to learn and grow. And I'm doing this because this is the purpose or the outcome and the effect it'll have or the impact it'll have.
I wouldn't know from experience, but it kind of feels like those mindsets are also very rooted in spending time in the reserves as well and kind of, having that purpose behind that mission. So that's kind of a cool correlation there.
Definitely.
So did any of these transitions in your career involve taking any big risks? And would you recommend that the next generation, think about taking similar risks while they're progressing in their careers?
Yes. And I would actually encourage be comfortable with being uncomfortable. Like some of those major moves or some of those things that I attribute as my ultimate success ultimately came down to me being willing to do a pivot and taking on something that kind of stretched my capabilities or where I was comfortable. And it's funny, the middle part of my time at Booz Allen, I had an executive there who was also one of my mentors who he said, you're the Red Adair, like in a capability, like as a leader. And what he meant by that is, Red Adair is, the legendary oil well fighter. Paul Adair, he was brought in for all those critical things and he could figure it out. And what the leader told me was it's a compliment in the sense that people recognize you're highly skilled and reliable in a crisis and you can handle complex problems that others can't. And just in my time with him, it was like, we've asked you to be in 3 or 4 very different roles and you've done it. You've figured it out and you've been very successful. And that's why we see you differently than like another technologist that we might not work in. And for me, it takes it back to that thread of resilience through purpose. Not only was I creating value, whether it's for the company or ultimately the customer, but I went back to this is a mission that customer ultimately had or the company had. And that's grounded me when, I was kind of looking at a problem going, how are we going to solve this? How can we break this down into more manageable chunks of work that gets us there?
Yeah, it's so interesting as you've talked a lot about, having purpose behind the work that you're doing. It feels like success came about from that mindset rather than striving for the next position or, climbing the corporate ladder. It feels like thinking of your responsibilities and your job that way has kind of moved you forward, rather than the traditional sense of success, if you will.
Yes. And I will tell you, I can't pinpoint when exactly it happened, but my whole idea of success at some point went from a view of individual achievement, title and recognition to collective impact, legacy, and influence. Anybody who looks me up on LinkedIn or whatnot, especially recently when I kind of posted my culminating, I retired from the military, there just came this point where it's like, I want to leave something behind that's better than it was before. And I want people to collectively feel like we made an impact. And there's that legacy I left behind. And it's funny, like the transition from Booz Allen to ASRC Federal, if you look at the ASRC Federal mission, where it talks about building this enduring enterprise for our shareholders, our customers, and our employees, it very much resonated to me in the sense of like, that's legacy and influence is what's important to me. And so being able to have that foundation that lasts long beyond what my tenure or my time there, it was really important for me. And I'm hoping others see that. And they also, they go on that journey that kind of shifts from that individual focus to, I want to leave a lasting impact that lasts long after I've, gone somewhere else.
Yeah, absolutely. So something that we also like to talk about on the show is hard-earned lessons that are, caused by mistakes. So is there a mistake that you look back on now and think, I really needed that one to kind of, get me where I am?
Yes, and I'll frame it in the vein of over-engineering a solution, oftentimes realizing that simplicity wins, especially in technology. It happens more than you think it would, but I was working this very, very large movement, physical movement of a data center from, one location to another. And we tried to account for every permutation there could be. And overall, the move went well, but there was this one challenge that we had where, long story short, after hours of like all these things and all these brilliant ideas at the time that we had, it was the simplest thing in the world that just was like, we just used the wrong command, but we had been staring at it for so long. We were just over engineering to like, here's how we're going to fix it. And it really like gave us the ability to kind of take a step back and go through it. So I would say that mistake, and it even happens latter part of spin. The difference now I think is I can recognize it because, you've had a couple of those instances, but like simplicity, stay simple, make sure you understand the problem that you're working, because not only will it help you through like a problem, but when you're building solutions to meet the needs of a business, technical solutions, simplicity, like it often wins, but it also helps you drive towards efficiencies instead of over-engineering this thing that you kind of lose some of the efficiency of what you aim to do in the first place.
And kind of similarly, as we talk about challenges, which this might have been, the challenge that you look back on as well, but what mindset helped you push through to the other side of the challenge early on in your career? When you're thinking about this challenge being kind of the biggest hurdle I'll be overcoming. In hindsight, there's many challenges in our career, but was there one that really stuck with you that you really had to work through?
So the example that I touched on in moving into a role when I was at Booz Allen, where it was like, we've acquired this company and we're going to take a bunch of you and you're going to be this team that integrates them. Shedding my team at the time, shedding my work that I had at the time to go into this, this very small team, very focused roles. I was very uncomfortable because I was like, oh man, I've never done anything like this. I can talk and work through the technical things of like, how do we do this together? But just feeling very exposed in the sense of like, oh man, I got to really learn like just some basics that in my technical career that you typically don't really pick up. And going back to the point I was sharing before, like that idea of a growth mindset, I could have looked at that and said, oh, you know what? Maybe I'm not the right person for this. Let's find somebody else. But really seeing that as like, hey, it's something different. Obviously, it's important or they wouldn't have asked me. I'm going to use this as an opportunity to learn. And going back to the relationships point, I'm going to use those relationships to talk to people and go, hey, I don't really understand how this works, but I'm being asked to kind of give an answer here. Here's how I'm thinking about it. Am I thinking about this right? Am I thinking about it wrong? How would you look at it? And asking different people to get those perspectives to show up at the table with here's how I think we start to tackle this and tapping into those relationships and being willing to say, yeah, I'm not really sure, but I'm going to learn as much as I can to get to a right answer and ultimately overcome whatever that challenge is.
So, today, CIO for a major federal contractor, What's the hardest part about supporting federal customers the way that you are today, and how would you prepare the next generation for it?
So I'll focus on the latter part first.
Mhm.
The how do you prepare for what's in the end? I think the first thing is recognizing that your path isn't going to be linear, right? Success does not follow a straight line. And
Mhm.
especially when you look at the kinds of problems our federal customers, clients are trying to address, you could be working on a variety of different things that some are very much in your strike zone, some maybe slightly out, and then maybe others that are like, hey, this is building on what you have to apply it to a different problem set that you had. So I think that's the big element of like just embrace being adaptable. Like I said earlier, be comfortable with being uncomfortable and help drive that there. Being willing to do that builds trust, it builds relationships where over time, whether it's a customer or it's a customer internally, it builds trust where they start to come to you to just solicit your thoughts, even if it's just an idea they're thinking about that helps you further strengthen the relationship you have with them.
What influence has the diversity in your career had on your leadership approach and the way that you lead today?
That transition from like individual focus to legacy and whatnot, just
Mhm.
leadership is about influence, right? How you influence folks and lead them through times of certainty, times of uncertainty. And so, really reframing the thought to be like, I said this a lot when I was in the Army, like, and I think I even mentioned it at my retirement ceremony where it's like, hey, all these medals I have, all these accolades you keep hearing people say, like, yeah, I was the guy in the seat, but I attribute that to all of the people I led. And, if you take care of them, if you give them purpose, if you show them like, this is why we're doing what we're doing, they will just instinctively look for ways to overcome hurdles because
Mhm.
they understand where you're trying to go. Hey, as a leader, this person cares about me. And from a military side, they'll follow you anywhere. But that mindset shifting from individual to legacy
Mhm.
and really thinking about I'm a steward of leadership. My role is to take care of the people. It's to provide them purpose. It's to provide them like just the North Star that they're heading towards and then getting out of their way to let them go do it, but also serving as a mentor and a coach when they're kind of struggling with like, I have these multiple options. I think this is the right one. I just need a sounding board.
Yeah, sometimes the only way to kind of figure things out is to do it and have that opportunity to do it. So that makes sense. I'm curious, I've talked about this a lot on this show, kind of the difference in today's career society where, jumping around or not jumping around, but spending less time at organizations is a bit more common than it used to be, just from the way the industry is and the society around career progression today. But having spent, over 12 years at Booz Allen and even more with the Army Reserves, do you advise mentees to work with a single organization for longer periods of time? Has that benefited you in your career?
So as I mentioned before, right? So career paths aren't linear. It's symbiotic, right? There's value and there's impact you're providing, and you should be getting that as well. If you look at my career early on, I was similar to what what you attributed to today, where it was like, a year or two here, a year or two there. Some of that was just trying to figure out like, what do I want to be when I grow up? But then when I shifted from individual title recognition to that impact, collective impact and legacy influence, being able to be there for whatever the time is, like everybody's journey is differently, but when I go to an organization, I'm going there because I'm investing a significant amount of my time and my impact to make a difference, and I'm getting that back from them. And so really embracing that says, I'm here to make a difference, and then let's see how this journey unfolds. And in my previous role at Booz, like I spent so much time there because I think not only was I challenged, but I had leaders who also saw like, hey, there comes a point where he kind of gets steady state. And if we throw another challenge at him, it reinvigorates him and excites him. But again, going back to the curiosity I mentioned before and everything else, that was a big motivator for me. And in the latter parts, it became a matter of I'm coming here because I want to make the place better. I want to leave this enduring area or this enduring value. And I'm here at ASRC Federal because they are an Alaska Native owned corporation that, as you noted, works in the federal space, and their shareholders are more than 14,000 Inuit shareholders that live on the Alaska North Slope. And so the shareholder value we create is helping them live in an area that it is very expensive to live. So when things get really tough and you're up against that big challenge, for me, part of the why am I here or what's my purpose is the value I'm creating for my customers that ultimately creates shareholder value is helping Alaska Natives basically live on the North Slope, which resonates very strongly with me. Again, going back to the legacy, impact, things like that.
Yeah, I think this message around kind of finding that purpose and guiding your career with that purpose is so important to share. So I love that we're touching on this. I think especially in the IT realm where technology can seem so cool and new and shiny, putting the purpose behind it is, an exciting ideology rather than just, working on technology, especially in this field. But, looking ahead, speaking of technology, what technologies or trends are you seeing will have the biggest impact on federal IT in the next few years? How are you preparing for them?
Yeah, so I'd say two that jump out right away, right? Cybersecurity, just broadly cybersecurity. And then, it wouldn't be a conversation if we didn't mention artificial intelligence, right?
Right.
So cybersecurity, if you look at just the general movement, with CMMC and protecting, especially in the DoD side, that type of data, it's critical to understand the fundamentals and the basics of it, right? So there was a time right back in the day where there was the mindset of like, oh, well, security, that's IT's thing. They deal with that. But it's very much today become a shared responsibility, not just in what, companies implement or do, but with phishing being so prevalent and social engineering and whatnot, users are just as much a part of the process and outfitting and educating them on like what to look for, how to respond, being mindful of the type of data that you have that's been entrusted to you. And even if you're not sure what to do, knowing I can pick up a phone or I can open a ticket or whatever to ask for help. So we, obviously as a capability, ASRC Federal deals a lot in zero trust realm, cyber security engineering and whatnot. And we very much within the IT organization, very much for our corporate information and systems, are just as sharply focused on making sure our systems are secure, they're resilient, we're keeping pace of the threats that are out there and adapting our environment and our workforce to be able to detect and respond to those events. On the other side, with artificial intelligence, obviously it's, very much a disruptor. There's a lot of promise out there, and depending on who you talk about, different variants of it being at different stages in the hype cycle. What I typically tell folks and is you need to look at it from what is the value or the outcome that you want to have. Just putting AI in for AI's sake, you're going to find that you get partway down the road and you've invested a lot, but maybe you're not really getting to the outcome you thought you were going to get to. And so framing and setting hey, this is the effect we want by doing this, to at least measure against to go, hey, we thought we'd get X amount of, percent effectiveness.
Mhm.
We only got this much, but we still got some and it's worth it. So understanding that, and that's very much a model here, at least for our corporate systems, that we're taking in the sense of, obviously AI is going to help make us effective. It's going to add efficiencies. We're going to be able to automate routine things as you think about agentic and whatnot, but really looking at what's the outcome we want to get here? How could we measure it in a quantitative and qualitative way? And then let's see what comes of it. It doesn't say if we don't hit the number, we're going to abandon it, but let's focus on it instead of like, hey, let's just go buy a bunch of licenses of this and see what happens, because everybody's saying it's going to make us better or more adaptable.
Yeah, and kind of talking about these technological changes and the pace of which they're evolving. Obviously, training plays a role, upskilling, making sure your teams are, up to date with the new technologies. But how important is mentorship and culture when preparing teams for these changes?
It's very, very important. If you're driving a major change in your environment or your culture, and you're not thinking about like change management, like how are you going to not only put the technology in place, but how are you going to educate people? How are you going to get them to think about it? You'll find adoption struggles because they're not really sure what's there, right? So I find the success factor is pointing out. So if you've thought about like what is the outcome that we want to get, and frame it in the sense of we're implementing or we're doing this to get to this outcome. Number one, that you're aligning people on that North Star so they're coming on the journey with you. But in some cases, they will also identify things that you had not thought about that produce value that was like, oh my Lord, this is great. Yes, this is fantastic. But from a cyber perspective, I'll say on the flip side, a lot of the things that we've been doing, when I talk about reacting to the threat environment and reacting to what the regulatory landscape looks like, we spend a lot of time on, hey, we're doing this because of this, not just because John woke up one day and said, hey, I'm going to change this to make it a little bit harder for the users, but helping them understand, like, this is why it's heading that way. And within my team, I encourage them a lot, like, hey, you should read about this. You should learn about it because it is something that either it's here, it's coming, like, continue to be relevant, continue to understand, because you never know when you're going to be asked to be placed in a role that's a little bit different. And you'll already have kind of a basic understanding, perhaps, to help you as you go into that uncharted land.
We ask this question to most of our guests, mostly because I feel like it's something that I would love to gather as a young professional and kind of compile into a list and think about. But what value or skill would you hardwire into every young professional at this point, if you could?
Adaptability and empathy. Adaptability, being able to pivot and learn continuously. And in empathy, especially for leadership and technology, understanding the people are just as critical as the system or technology you're implementing.
And my last question for you is kind of a little bit of a pivot because I don't know how many people I'd ever be able to ask this of, but what is the biggest difference and similarity between leading a team of musicians and leading a team of IT professionals?
Hey, so you'd be surprised how there are actually similarities. Like, so musicians and technology professionals, very heavy creatives, right? Like the creative side of their brain that they use, whether it's to create a beautiful piece of music or to come up with a technical solution based on a statement or two, lots of commonality there. I would say the differences become more on the IT side. You tend to be very requirements, schedule, risk driven, right? So there's a bit more structure. Whereas on the musical side, while you may have a sheet of music that's guiding you, in some cases, especially if you're thinking like the jazz genre, what makes that music so beautiful is the space they give you to just create within a key signature or whatnot. And so very much being able to recognize over here, requirements, project, schedule, risk, right, et cetera. Whereas on the musical side, it's bringing those collective folks together on recognizing the strengths and then giving them the space to just create some sometimes incredibly beautiful music.
Right. Awesome. I wasn't expecting that answer, but that was very cool. Thank you for sharing.
You're welcome.
Well, John, thank you again for joining me on Rookies to Rockstars, sharing a bit about your background. I know we kind of discussed a lot about your career and the different lessons you've learned and things that you carry with you as a leader. I think these notes are very important for the next generation, especially as you spoke on collective impact and legacy influence in this IT space and as you work with federal customers. So thanks for sharing all that with us. And I really appreciate you being here today.
Thank you so much for your time. And I open to anybody, yourself or the listeners. I'm happy to come back or find me on LinkedIn. Happy to connect, talk to you more, not only about my experiences, but hey, if you're interested in coming and being part of the legacy and enduring enterprise we're creating here, I'm the guy to talk to.
Awesome. Yeah, this is a great way to find mentors, network, the importance of that in this industry. So thanks for sharing that. Thanks for listening to Rookies to Rockstars. GovCon doesn't come with a playbook, but these stories might be the next best thing. Follow the show, share it with someone still figuring it out, and connect with us on LinkedIn. We'd love to hear from you.